Hey everybody, this is Shenandoah County Sheriff Timothy Carter, and today I have a returning guest, a special guest, is my state senator from the Commonwealth of Virginia here with us, Mark Obenshain. He serves as our state senator in the 26th district here in the Valley. And Senator, thanks for being on with us this afternoon and talking about an important subject here today. We're going to talk a little bit about this whole parole board thing that's going on down in Richmond.
You bet. Well, Sheriff, good to talk to you and appreciate your having me, inviting me back so soon. And thanks for paying a little bit of attention to this issue, which really is an important public safety issue.
Right. Well, I think the first thing what we need to, there is a parole board. It's I think it's made up of 5 people. Are they all appointed by the governor, or how does that work, Senator?
Yeah, the parole board is made up of 5 members. It has 2 full-time and 3 part-time members, and these are plum positions. These are not just boards that are honorary. These folks, I think the full-time members are paid somewhere in the neighborhood of $120,000 a year, and the part-time members not a whole lot less. So these are A, they're important positions, but B, they are very lucrative, sought-after jobs. And Sheriff, you and I've been around long enough that we remember the days back in the 80s and early 90s when Virginia really had a revolving door in its prison system. People were convicted of murder, and 6 years later, they were out on parole.
Right.
And the poor folks who served on juries in Virginia, they deliberate for hours and sometimes days, agonizing over what a fair sentence was going to be for, these many times horrible crimes. And only to find out that life actually means, in some cases, 5 or 6 years. And back in 1995, a Democrat majority in the General Assembly and Governor George Allen decided that was just wrong, and we needed to adopt some truth in sentencing. And in 1995, we essentially eliminated parole in Virginia and said, if life sentence is imposed, it's going to mean life. 10 years is imposed, it's going to mean 10 years. So after that, the job of the parole board was really pretty limited. They didn't have a lot to do except rule on parole requests for people who were sentenced before 1995.
Right. And I tell you, I can't remember where I heard this, but there was a saying, or there's I forget who coined the phrase, that really the only certainty to a person adhering to doing the right thing is knowing that there are some consequences if you commit a crime. And when you have people that commit these violent crimes, and like you say, they're released not really immediately, but pretty quickly, there's not really a lot of incentive to not to commit the crime. In other words.
Yeah, so, and after adopting that truth in sentencing, our violent crime rate in Virginia went way, way down.
Right.
And we are, I think, headed back to kind of a pre-1990s scenario in which we are walking back a lot of those reforms that really made Virginia an awful lot safer, and I consider that to be, unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. I know I guess you'd call it my intersection with this parole board issue that's been going on. I was part of those. We state leadership around the Commonwealth would have these phone calls when COVID hit last year, and they started like in the middle of March, and they've actually continued on. They're still having those things, I think, pretty frequently, but less and less people are connected to them. But anyway, we'd have these phone calls with state officials, i.e. the governor or the Secretary of Public Safety and so on. And in one of those calls early on, There was an incident that was brought up, and that was the early parole of a man by the name of Vincent Martin. And Vincent Martin, for people who don't know, he was convicted of murdering a Richmond City police officer back in 1979. And of course, I'm on the call when this is being discussed, and I think it was the actual Virginia Chiefs of Police Association brought up their concerns that they were getting wind that Mr. Martin was going to be paroled, and anyway, that's kind of when I started to pay attention to what was going on. I really don't know. At the time, the leadership from the state really didn't give us an answer as to whether or not he was going to be paroled early, but apparently they did. And we, the Virginia Sheriff's Association at the time, I was the president of the Virginia Sheriff's Association. I sent a letter along with the Virginia Chiefs of Police, and I think the Virginia State Police organization also sent one asking for this decision to be reviewed by the governor so that they wouldn't be allowing this violent criminal to be released. And I don't think it really mattered. So I'm not sure if you knew about that particular incident. But then what happened was, in my mind, it almost seemed like there was this. I don't know if justification is the right word, but it just seemed like people started to get paroled more frequently than not. And this was in last year, that last spring, summer of last year. That's when I started to start seeing this more. I don't know if you've got any comments about that.
Yeah, absolutely. It really did start right around March of last year. And as I mentioned before, for 25 years, there wasn't really a lot that the parole board did. But in March of 2020, there was, go back to March of 2019, there were 7 prisoners who were granted parole. March of 2019. In March of 2020, they paroled 96 inmates, a 1,271% increase in a year. And in March of 2020, something obviously was going on with the parole board. And it wasn't COVID that was going on. It was a massive change in the mindset with respect to what are we going to do about parole in Virginia. And the Vincent Martin case is what really brought this issue to people's attention. They learned, it really came to light because police officers and law enforcement agencies learned that Vincent Martin was going to be released, and it really upset a lot of law enforcement officers. And what came out, and I'll tell you, your description of that is accurate. 1979, Vincent Martin and I think it was 3 of his buddies, they robbed a 7-Eleven, and they were on their way, from the scene of the crime, and they were pulled over by a Richmond City police officer for nothing to do with the robbery. And when he pulled them over for a simple traffic infraction, running stop sign, stoplight, or something, Vincent Martin got out of the vehicle and pulled a gun on this police officer and shot him in the back of the head without even giving him an opportunity to get his gun out of his holster. Shot him execution style. Right. And he was tried for capital murder, was sentenced to die in the electric chair following his first trial. However, there was an appeal, and it was sent back, and ultimately he was retried, found guilty a second time, and sentenced to life in prison for this brutal murder of a young Richmond City police officer. And what came to light was that he was being released without giving notice to local law enforcement. No notice had been provided to the Commonwealth's attorney for the city of Richmond, and no notification was given to the family of the slain police officer that Vincent Martin was coming up for parole. At least that's my recollection. And it was either no notice was given to them that he was up for parole or had been paroled. And as a consequence, nobody was going to have an opportunity to express concerns about threat to public safety or objections to his release. And as a result of the public outcry, the administration pulled this back and said, we're going to hold on to this, and we're not going to release him until we can cross those T's and dot those I's. And they fixed those technical issues, the violations of their obligation to notify law enforcement and the victim's family. But what also came to light is that this is just part of a crusade. The chairman of the parole board told newspaper and others that she was uncertain about Vincent Martin's guilt. And that she had gone through and done her own investigation over a period of years, had reviewed transcripts, and she thought somehow the trial, in this case trials, were tainted. And let me tell you, that's not the job of the parole board.
Right.
The chairman of the parole board is not supposed to be relitigating cases from 20 or 30 years ago. They're supposed to be making decisions about whether it's safe to release a violent criminal into a community, not exercising independent, second guessing, armchair quarterbacking juries who actually heard all of the evidence. And so it became clear that there was some new mindset that was setting in, and we found that the number of cases was astronomical, of people who were being released under very similar circumstances, who were being released without giving notice to Commonwealth's attorneys or to victims' families.
Right.
I don't want to make this a monologue, but I'll tell you, down in Halifax County, there was a second case involving a woman named Deborah Scrivener, who was convicted of the murder, her role in the murder of her son-in-law. She co-opted her 15-year-old grandchild to take a gun and shoot his father in the head and kill him. And she and the grandchild and grandchild's mother took this body, rolled it up, and threw it down a well. And this was, I think, in 2012. And without notifying the prosecutor in Halifax County or the victim's family, that inmate was released. And to this day, I mean, she's walking around South Boston, eating in restaurants with where the victim's family may very well be. And this is just wrong. Somebody has decided we're going to open the doors of Virginia's prisons, and they're pursuing an agenda that is contrary to the interests of safety of our communities, and they're ignoring their own rules. They're ignoring the laws that require notification of law enforcement and require notification of families. They're ignoring that.
And I tell you, Senator, speaking of the notification, the Virginia Victim Information and Notification Every Day, the VINE system, now that's been around for several years, I think. And
It sure has.
And going back to the actual evaluating the case independent of taking it back to court. Even if you did that, which I don't think you should be doing that. I think you should let someone know, the Attorney General's office or somebody, or the prosecuting office, who prosecuted the case should know that you have questions about the case or the matter that came up in court back in 1979, 1980. You still have the Vine system where you're supposed to be giving adequate notice, and it didn't seem like that was being done. I mean, when we were on the phone call, as I recall, it might have been the subsequent phone call to the one where we brought up this particular case. That's when we started hearing that there was going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of people being released from prison back into communities. And anyway, I assumed that when they were telling us that they were making all the appropriate notifications, but I don't know if that's actually what was happening. I don't know.
Well, it absolutely was not. And recent news articles revealed that there was there has subsequently developed a scandal over whether there's a cover-up of the actions of the parole board, and whether there's a conscious effort to keep newspapers and the public from learning that they are disregarding their statutory obligations. And one of the most recent disclosures came from a whistleblower. And this has been in the newspaper, been the Richmond paper, and on other outlets. There was a email exchange between a member of the parole board and a staff member, in which it appeared that the parole board member was instructing the staff member to disable the Vine system, the victim notification system, for a particular case, because it was such a horrific murder. And they figured that the family of this victim, who was a murdered, pregnant teenage girl in Hampton Roads, that they would object to the release of this murderer. And in order to facilitate, or at least it sure does appear that in order to facilitate the release without public blowback, they sure do appear to have deliberately avoided notifying that family, which is awful.
Now, Senator, later in the fall of last year, didn't the state, the Office of the State Inspector General, did they not conduct some kind of a investigation or an inquiry into this?
Yeah, the State Inspector General is supposed to be a watchdog agency, supposed to be looking for waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption in executive department agencies. And they have a tip line, and where somebody sees an illegal act, they can call the Inspector General. And there were a number of complaints apparently lodged about the actions of the parole board, and the Inspector General conducted 6, maybe 7 different investigations of different cases. And in every single one of those cases, they found that the allegations were substantiated, that there were violations of state law, policy, and or procedure by the parole board in connection with these releases. So this is not just one case in which there was a screw-up and an inadvertent failure to notify or to follow the rules. This appears to be a pattern and practice that has been substantiated by the Inspector General. Of course, now the governor indicated that he wanted to have an independent investigation. We all thought that he wanted an independent investigation of the parole board. Turns out he wants an independent investigation of the inspector general, so that he can, I guess, find a counterpoint to these findings that there was wrongdoing. And as a matter of fact, he put $250,000 into the budget for this year to pay a New York law firm to come down to Virginia and investigate not the parole board, not its practices, not its violations, but to investigate the watchdog, which who, by the way, is appointed by the governor as well. So, I'm profoundly disturbed that we have an issue that I think has gotten an awful lot of attention. It sure does bear all of the hallmarks of, just deliberate violations of statutes, policies, and procedures. Yet the administration is more interested in justifying it than in getting them to follow the law. Back in 2002, Mark Warner was governor of Virginia. Democrat, I'm a Republican. Mark Warner came into office, and the parole board had just released a felon without notifying the family of victims. He was so outraged, he fired the entire parole board. One case. Now we have an epidemic of violations, and nothing is happening. And while I mentioned epidemic, don't be confused. This has nothing to do with COVID.
Right.
When COVID hit last March, there was an effort that many of us supported to make jails safer by taking nonviolent offenders and offenders who are older or who were near the end of their sentence, to allow early release of those persons to avoid placing their lives at risk. These people who are subject of these parole inquiries do not qualify, did not qualify, would not qualify for that COVID release. And if anything, it gives the appearance that COVID maybe was a nice cover for what was happening with the parole board. And I don't think that it was any coincidence that the rapid acceleration of paroles of violent offenders corresponded with the beginning of COVID.
Well, and also even in the parole board's response to the officer of the inspector general, they say there are several bills pending in the special session in 2020 that would further expand access to parole, in turn increasing the board's responsibilities. So in other words, the verbal messaging was, well, we're doing this because it's COVID, but what was happening behind the scenes, or at least it seems to me what was happening behind the scenes, is that there was a concerted effort to expand access to parole, and which, for maybe some circumstances that might be something that needs to happen. But it seems to me they were just they knew this was happening. They knew that they were going to start releasing more people, and our concerns, at least my concerns and my peers that I've spoken to, were the violent offenders being released. The violent offenders, the offenders were victims were not being notified or giving adequate notice so that they could, I don't know if you want to call it question or ask for a review before the release is granted. But that was our biggest concern, was that it just seemed like like the doors were just open, and now I'm finding out that there were actually some bills that were being put on the table to help accelerate this. And this was beyond COVID. This was not, in my mind, it was beyond COVID.
Yeah, and it's not the job of the parole board to anticipate what the General Assembly might do in the future. If they want expanded an expanded role, if they want to expand parole, it's not their job. Their job is to follow the law, and it is no excuse that there is legislation in the General Assembly that might in the future allow them to do what they did without that authority. And, the cases all over Virginia are, really shocking.
Mm-hmm.
The types of inmates that were being released. Another one in Chesapeake was Patrick Schooley, who was convicted and sent to prison for life for the rape, robbery, and murder of a 78-year-old woman in Chesapeake. Now, you don't think that people in Chesapeake would have been concerned if they had learned that this monster was going to be released? I mean, they absolutely were. And he was released without notification of the family of the victim or of the Commonwealth's attorney. That's just wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no justification for that.
Right. I think one other thing, I don't know if I think you still sit on the Senate Judiciary Committee.
I do.
You still sit on that. You're not the chairman at this point. I think that's a guy, John Edwards from Roanoke, I believe.
Correct.
The chairman now. And
correct.
Have you asked for any action by the state or the Senate Judiciary Committee? Has that anything been done there, or do you think anything might be done there?
Well, those are two different questions.
Okay.
Yes, we have asked. No, I do not think anything will be done. There was at least one Democrat in the state Senate who joined Republicans in asking for a joint bipartisan legislative review of the actions of the parole board. The requests were made, and to date, we've received no substantive response. There's been a suggestion that they don't have power. We do have that power. We can subpoena witnesses. We can place them under oath. We can investigate. But instead, just this past weekend, the Attorney General signed a contract with a New York law firm to do this investigation of the Inspector General. Coincidentally, perhaps the partner heading the investigation just in January left the employ of the New York Attorney General's office. And so, my hopes are not high that this will be truly independent.
Well,
which is unfortunate.
Yeah, and I tell you, I think we spoke. If I didn't talk with you about this, I talked with the Board of Supervisors when I met with them a few weeks ago. There was this time in the Commonwealth where legislative decisions it was a deliberative process, and you got a chance to vet these ideas or these initiatives, and it just seems like at least for the last 2020, 2021, that's not happening anymore, Senator. I mean, people, I think people sometimes are critical because, things happen slow in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Now it just seems like things are just being thrown out on the table, and there's not any real evaluation of the idea, by the people that it affects, i.e. the law enforcement community or the victims of crime or what have you. And, as I sit here listening to you with regard to this, it just seems like we're, I'm not sure where this is all going to end, but I know we have another special session coming up this summer, and not to sound too cynical, but I believe it's going to be a little bit more of the same of what we've been dealing with for the last year. It's very sad.
Yeah. While I'm certainly a political partisan, there's an awful lot to be said for split control of government. And, we've seen that in Washington. We've seen it in Richmond. Sometimes slowing things down just a little bit allows people to talk about, to deliberate, to actually find problems before we implement new programs and new laws. And I guess for the past 2 years in Richmond, we've had a Democrat governor, a new Democratic majority in the House of Delegates, and a new Democratic majority in the state Senate. And so they control the legislature and the executive branch, and it just seems like there's been a real rush to hurry out a lot of proposals that the Democrats have been sitting on or frustrated about over a long period of time. And I think some of those might have advanced with bipartisan support if we'd had an opportunity to look at them and actually work through some problems. But that's not what we're seeing, and we're seeing an awful lot of problems. Take the marijuana legislation, and no matter what you feel about legalization of marijuana, and I have consistently been opposed to it primarily because of the impact on children and adolescents, teenagers. But we just passed a bill that the governor said was impossible to implement before 2024, I think.
Right.
But then so much political pressure was applied between, I guess, the end of February and when we went back for veto session in early April, that they changed their mind and said, no, we're going to implement it this summer. So you can have up to, up to, almost a pound of marijuana. And it will be legal to possess, but of course it's illegal to sell.
Right.
So I don't know where these people are supposed to get it.
Right.
But there are a lot of problems with this. And, if we'd had time to talk about it, even people who are opposed to it, will work with you to try and get a piece of legislation that's less bad than what, you're going to rush out. And so we're getting a lot of kind of crazy legislation that we're going to spend a lot of time and a lot of years trying to fix.
Well, Senator, I've finished. I don't have any other questions about this parole board issue. Is there anything I've missed or that you can think of on that topic?
Well, I have a lot of questions about parole board,
right.
And I think a lot of people do.
Right.
And I just I hope that somehow we can get to the bottom of this. I think the easy solution is that the governor just really needs to fire the entire parole board and start from scratch and move on. And hopefully he'll see the light of day, and we'll do that. Of course, we all have an opportunity every November to impact that. And this big November, General Assembly elections and gubernatorial elections, and that may have an impact on it as well.
Well, and I would hope, for years, I know it took years for advocates of victims' rights to get some of these things done that we've talked about, the Vine system and other things that are out here, and it just seems like we're just kind of throwing that out the window now. So there, I get it. There's all different types of interests in a particular issue, but it is, when you start opening those old wounds for the families of the victims of these violent offenders, and then placing violent offenders in communities that weren't expecting to have a violent offender, and they already have the problems that they have. It just seems like it's we're in a different time right now. So, Senator, I do want to thank you for joining me today, and hopefully we'll have you back soon. And it's been real special to get a few minutes of your time.
Well, as always, it's my pleasure. Good visiting with you. Sorry we're not in the same room visiting today, but look forward to seeing you soon.
All right, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. Today, my guest was State Senator Mark Obenshain. And I want to thank you for joining us. Don't forget to follow me on @TimothyC.Carter on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, along with full podcasts that can be found on my YouTube channel. So pay attention to what we're doing here with The Source and hit that subscribe button to get new show notifications, and please smash that like button.